NASA! Your dad? The teacher's laugh wasn't loud, but it was sharp, like the snap of a rubber band across the soul. That was the moment the room shifted. 8-year-old Caleb Dawson sat frozen on the rug of room 14 at Lakeside Elementary, his voice still hanging in the air like smoke. He hadn't told a joke, he'd just told the truth. And they laughed. Not just the kids. The teacher. The one who was supposed to believe in him. The one who was supposed to protect dreams. And across the room, a crumpled drawing in his backpack whispered of something more. Something that hadn't happened yet. But it would, because someone was about to walk through that classroom door, wearing a badge. From NASA. Thank you for being here. Sometimes, the smallest moments carry the greatest meaning. Today's story is one of those, quiet, powerful, and worth remembering. If it touches your heart, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like more stories like this, you're warmly invited to subscribe and tap the bell so you won't miss the next one. Now let's take a closer look at what really happened. Room 14 smelled like pencil shavings and hand sanitizer. It was career week at Lakeside Elementary, and for once, third grade didn't feel like a grind. No math quizzes, no spelling drills, just kids cross-legged on a colorful rug, waiting for grown-ups to show up with stories. But Caleb Dawson wasn't thinking about cupcakes or stethoscopes. He was thinking about a voice. His own. He'd rehearsed it for days. My dad works at NASA. He'd said it a dozen times in the mirror, adding a smile, a shrug, even a joke about space having bad Wi-Fi. But now, sitting there with sweaty palms and knobby knees pressed together, Caleb could feel the words sticking like peanut butter to the roof of his mouth. Then Mr. Harris called his name. Caleb, want to share what your parents do? The boy sat straighter, cleared his throat, eyes bright. Back tall. My dad, he said carefully, works at NASA. Silence. Not curious silence. Not the kind where someone waits to be amazed. This silence was loaded. A snort came from the back. One kid whispered, "Yeah, right." But it wasn't the kids that landed the blow. It was Mr. Harris, early 40s khakis, tucked polo. That type of adult who still thought realistic was a compliment. He chuckled. Low, dismissive, surgical. NASA, huh? He said with a crooked grin. That's quite the imagination. Maybe next time let's aim for something more realistic. Lauder bubbled. A girl giggled behind her hands. Realistic. Someone repeated like it was a punchline. And just like that, Caleb's shoulders dropped. His hands curled into fists. His sneakers tapped against each other, trying to vanish into the rug. He said nothing. Not because he didn't have more to say, but because no one wanted to hear it. Mr. Harris moved on. Didn't notice the way Caleb's eyes no longer lifted from the floor. Didn't hear how Mila, sitting cross-legged beside him, whispered, "I believe you." Caleb just nodded, a tiny nod, the kind you give when you're trying not to cry in front of 26 people. Lunchtime came. The sun was out. The swing set stood waiting. Caleb sat under the tree, his sandwich untouched. He didn't dance by the vending machines like the others, didn't join the race to the slides. Something inside had folded. Not broken. Not yet. But bent. Like a paper airplane that had taken a bad hit mid-flight. 3 days before, he'd been bouncing on a milk crate in his dad's garage, drinking Capri Sun and watching him sort cables. His dad, Dr. Evan Dawson, was the kind of man who could make math feel like a superpower and make silence feel like strength. Wet? Caleb asked. How long does it take for a message from Mars to get back to Earth? Evan didn't even look up from the wires. Anywhere from 5 to 20 minutes, depending on the orbit. Caleb blinked. Saw like texting someone with really bad service. Evan laughed. Exactly. Space is terrible Wi-Fi. That was their thing. Not bedtime stories, not cartoons, but science. Weird science. Funny science. Science that made the world feel like it had layers worth discovering. That night, Caleb carried one of his dad's NASA folders to bed. He laid it beside his pillow like treasure. Can I bring this to class? He asked. Evan looked at the folder. I don't think classified blueprints are allowed in third grade, buddy. Not even one page. Caleb grinned. Okay, can I at least draw something? You can draw whatever you want. But you don't need paper. You've got your voice. Then came the pause. The hesitation Caleb hadn't spoken aloud. What if they don't believe me? Even looked up. If they don't, that's their problem. Not yours. But what if they laugh? Even set down the wire bundle. He was quiet for a beat. Then, let them laugh. The truth doesn't need applause. It just needs someone brave enough to say it out loud. So Caleb had said it. At 9:17 a.m., with his classmates watching and the teacher smirking, he'd said the truth. And they laughed anyway. That afternoon, after tearing up his picture and stuffing it deep into his backpack, Caleb watched the door like a lifeline. Parents were arriving. Mechanics. Firefighters. Everyone clapped. Everyone smiled. Caleb didn't. He just hoped. Hoped his dad remembered. Hoped he didn't get caught in traffic. Hoped he'd walk in with that blue blazer and NASA badge and make everything right. But deep beneath the hope was something darker. A whisper. What if Mr. Harris was right? What if my dad's not who I thought? Even wasn't late. He wasn't lost. He'd been in back-to-back meetings all morning, prepping a slideshow with cartoons of Mars and satellites for the class. His favorite slide, a photo of him and Caleb at the NASA lab, matching badges. Big grins. A moment frozen in time. What he didn't know was that his son hadn't smiled once all day, because doubt, when planted by someone you're supposed to trust, roots fast. Mr. Harris had resumed his normal voice, reviewing spelling, calling on students, but he glanced at Caleb more than once. Each time Caleb didn't look back. He wasn't sulking, he wasn't crying. He was quiet in a way no 8-year-old should be. At 1:45 p.m. only a few parents remained. Mr. Harris, clipboard in hand, was in full host mode, waving people in, cracking jokes, smiling that safe teacher's smile. But something about his rhythm had cracked. He'd started to notice Caleb's stillness, the way he no longer raised his hand. Maybe he remembered the laugh. Maybe not. But the weight of what he'd said was hanging in the room like fog. And then, just as he raised his voice to announce the next guest, the door opened, and a man walked in, navy blazer, crisp shirt, NASA badge clipped to his chest like a key to another world. He didn't need an intro. He was the intro. The door hadn't even fully closed behind him, and the room already knew he didn't belong. Not in the usual way. He wasn't holding a tray of cupcakes, didn't bring a box of donuts or a toolbox. He carried something invisible, authority, presence, and the badge, that unmistakable rectangle clipped below his lapel, glinted just enough to confirm it was real. NASA, black letters, blue seal, no explanation needed. Caleb's chair scraped against the floor as he sat upright. His breath hitched, his mouth opened, but nothing came out, because part of him had started to believe his dad wouldn't come. Not because Dawson didn't care, but because when someone like Mr. Harris mocks your truth, you start to doubt what was once unshakable. That's what words do. When they come from someone who's supposed to matter. Evan scanned the room once. His eyes landed on his son, and he smiled, not wide, not showy. Just a steady, grounded smile. The kind you use when you're not here to prove anything. Just to remind the world that you're real. Hello, he said calmly, setting his laptop on the table. I'm Dr. Evan Dawson. I design communication systems for spacecraft. The room stilled. Not a gasp, not applause, just silence. The kind of silence that builds when assumptions collapse. Mr. Harris blinked. Mouth parted slightly, but no words followed. His clipboard, so full of order, so sure a moment ago, now felt like a paper shield. He stepped back, faded into the edge of the room. Caleb was still staring, not at his dad's slides, not at the pictures, but at him, just him. Even clicked the projector. The first image filled the whiteboard, a small, reddish dot in the distance. Mars. We work on the systems that keep spacecraft in touch with Earth, he explained. Think of it like giving robots cell phones. Except space has really bad reception. A laugh rippled across the rug. Even Mila giggled, and for the first time since that morning, Caleb smiled. The next slide showed a cluster of satellites. These are part of what we call the Mars Relay. They float in orbit around Mars and help us stay connected to our rovers. It's how we phone home from another planet. A hand shot up. A boy in the front asked, "Do you get to fly the rockets?" Even chuckled. "Nope. I help them talk after they've flown. Rockets are exciting, But without communication, they're just giant firecrackers. More laughter. Mr. Harris hadn't moved. He stood at the side wall, eyes flicking from Evan to Caleb, then back to Evan, his expression unreadable. But his silence was loud, almost respectful. Almost. Evan kept going. He didn't rush. He didn't push. He wasn't here to impress. He was here because his son said he would be. And he showed up. As the final slide faded, the one with him and Caleb at the Jet Propulsion Lab, Evan paused, then turned back to the class. "You've probably heard," he said casually, "that working at NASA sounds a little unrealistic." The air shifted. Even the third graders felt it. He let the pause hang, just long enough for everyone to remember who had said that. Then, with a glance at Caleb, he added, "Well, I suppose that depends on how you define realistic." And then, finally, he smiled. Caleb sat taller. Not loud, not gloating, just seen. Even Mila whispered, "I told you." Another classmate muttered, "Whoa. His dad's actually," and just like that, the doubt broke. The wall cracked, and all that remained was truth. Mr. Harris cleared his throat. "Thank you, Dr. Dawson. That was very informative." Evan offered a polite nod. "I've got to get back. Mars doesn't like to be kept waiting." The kids laughed again. As he gathered his things and walked past the teacher, he paused, just for a moment. Not enough to cause a scene, just enough to plant something. "I hope your students always feel heard," he said quietly, "especially the ones who dream big." Then he left, and the weight of that sentence stayed. For a full 5 seconds after the door clicked shut behind Dr. Evan Dawson, no one spoke. The projector screen still hummed. Mr. Harris stood frozen beside it, one hand gripping his clipboard, like it could somehow rewind time. The kids, they weren't looking at him. They were looking at Caleb, not to laugh, not to smirk, not to challenge, but to understand. The kid they doubted, dismissed, joked about just hours ago had told the truth. And that truth had just walked in, wearing a NASA badge. Caleb didn't move, didn't gloat, didn't say a word. He sat there, shoulders loose for the first time all day, chin up, breathing again, like someone who'd been underwater and finally reached the surface. Mr. Harris attempted to reset the rhythm. "Let's thank Dr. Dawson again." A few claps. Polite. Mila led it. Some followed. But the spark was gone. The cupcakes from the bakery, the tire gauge from the mechanic. Nobody cared anymore, because they'd seen something real. Caleb didn't look at Mr. Harris. Didn't need to. The power had shifted, and not in a loud, triumphant way. It shifted quietly, the way all real things do. After the final presentation, chairs scraped against tile. Backpacks zipped. The hallway buzzed. But Caleb didn't rush. He stayed at his desk, folding his worksheets slowly. No hurry, no hiding. Mr. Harris hovered near the door, then, awkwardly, he drifted toward Caleb's desk, stood there, fidgeting. "Hey," he said, voice forced casual. "Your dad seems like a smart guy." Caleb looked up. "He is." Mr. Harris nodded. "Yeah, I can see that." Then a pause. A real one. The kind adults only use when they're finally trying to be honest. "I may have jumped the gun earlier." Caleb didn't respond. Didn't make it easy. Didn't rescue him from the discomfort. Mr. Harris cleared his throat again. "What I meant to say is, sometimes teachers, people, make mistakes. We don't always realize when something we say comes out wrong." Another pause. Caleb stared up at him. "But you laughed." That hit. Mr. Harris' jaw tightened. "Yeah," he said. "I did. And I'm sorry. That wasn't right. I should have listened." Still, Caleb didn't nod. Didn't soften. Because some lessons are too expensive to let go cheap. Mr. Harris looked down. "I hope you'll give me a chance to do better." Caleb stood, shouldered his backpack, took a few steps toward the door, then paused, looked back over his shoulder. "It wasn't my imagination," he said softly. "That's really my dad." And then he walked out. The classroom felt colder without a minute. Mr. Harris stood by the empty desk, one hand still holding the clipboard, the other now deep in his pocket. And in that silence something cracked open, not loudly, not cleanly, but deeply. That night, the Arizona sky glowed peach and purple. Caleb sat at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal, his choice for dinner. The spoon clinked gently as he stirred, even leaned against the counter, sipping from a chipped mug that read, Space Nerd. Neither spoke right away. The quiet wasn't awkward, just honest. Then Caleb looked up. Did you hear him? Evan raised an eyebrow. Your teacher. Caleb nodded. When I said you worked at NASA, he laughed like it was a joke. Evan didn't rush a reply. He set the mug down. Walked over. Sat across from his son.
Yeah.
He said at last. I heard. Caleb frowned. Why do people do that? Ivan's voice was low, measured. Because sometimes they see the world like a box. And when something doesn't fit inside it, they laugh. It's not always hate. Sometimes it's just small thinking. Caleb stirred his cereal. I didn't feel smart anymore. Ivan leaned in, serious now. Don't ever let someone else's doubt erase your truth. You know who you are. You know who I am. That's what matters. The next morning at school, things felt different. The laughter from yesterday had vanished. Instead, kids made space for Caleb. Asked if his dad had ever met an astronaut, if he could bring in space tools next time. He didn't puff up, didn't brag, just answered simply, and kept moving. Mila walked beside him at recess. They believe you now. Caleb shrugged. They didn't have to. Mila grinned. Still nice, though. Back in the staff lounge, Mr. Harris sat alone. Coffee cold, he reached into his folder, pulled out a lined sheet of paper, folded it once. Twice, then quietly walked it to Caleb's cubby. No stamp, no email. Just ink. And an apology. Caleb found the note after lunch. It read, Caleb, I was wrong. You shouldn't have had to prove anything to us. Keep dreaming big. Mr. Harris, he didn't smile. Didn't read it twice. He folded it, slipped it into his backpack, zipped it shut, because he hadn't needed the apology. But maybe someone else had needed to write it. The final bell rang, chairs scraped, backpacks thudded against backs. Hallways echoed with third-grade chaos. But Caleb Dawson didn't rush. He walked slowly. Not because he was afraid, but because he wasn't shrinking anymore. Not for them. Not for anyone. At the front of the school, parents waited in cars. A few honked. A few waved. Evan stood under the shade of a tree, tie loosened, blazer folded over one arm, badge still clipped proudly to his chest. Caleb walked up, calm, no bounce, no slump, just sure. Go, Evan asked. Caleb shrugged. They clapped. Then, after a pause, they believed me? Evan smiled softly. Did that feel good? Caleb looked up. Yeah, but that's not why it mattered. Evan raised an eyebrow. Why did it matter? Caleb considered it. Then said, 'Cause I didn't change my answer, even when they laughed. The ride home was quiet, comfortable. At a red light, Evan glanced over. You did good, son. Caleb didn't look away from the window. I told the truth. That's all any of us can do. And it was, because truth, real truth, doesn't need to be shouted, doesn't need applause, doesn't even need to win the room. It just needs someone brave enough to say it out loud. The next week at school, things kept shifting. Kids who once rolled their eyes at Caleb now invited him into their games. Mila asked him to help with her science fair volcano. Even the boy who'd whispered, yeah, right, during Caleb's NASA moment, asked if his dad could talk to their class too. Caleb didn't rub it in, didn't flex, because power didn't look like revenge. It looked like peace. One afternoon, while cleaning out his desk, Caleb found the torn-up picture he'd crumpled on career day, the one with his dad drawn holding Earth in one hand and a satellite in the other. He smoothed it out, taped it together, didn't fix the rips, left them showing, then pinned it on the classroom bulletin board himself. No caption, no fanfare, just the truth. Out in the open. Mr. Harris passed by later and paused. He didn't say anything, just stared at the drawing for a long time before walking away. But something about his walk had changed. Less certain, more careful. As if he'd remembered something he'd forgotten. That children don't need us to set their limits. They need us to protect their possibility. Weeks passed, then months. The seasons changed. The story faded, at least for everyone else. But Caleb didn't forget. Because once you've had to defend your truth in a room full of doubt, something in you never goes back to being small. It doesn't harden. It just knows. And every now and then, Caleb would touch the edge of that drawing in the hallway and smile. He never brought in props. never brought in a real space tool. He didn't need to. He'd brought in his voice, and that had been enough. Sometimes we think kids need applause to feel strong, but what they really need is for someone to believe them the first time. And if no one does, they need to believe in themselves enough to say it anyway, because other people's laughter doesn't get the final word. Other people's doubts don't define your story. And when someone tells you, be more realistic, maybe, just maybe, you're already reaching farther than they ever imagined. Sometimes, a child's voice is the purest form of truth we have. And yet, it's often the one we're quickest to doubt. A quiet moment in a classroom, a laugh that came too fast, a dream dismissed before it had a chance to bloom. What this story reminds us is simple. Truth doesn't shout. It doesn't need permission. And it never asks for applause. It just waits for someone brave enough to say it out loud. If you're a parent, a teacher, a leader, remember this: every word we say has weight. It can shrink a child or let them fly. So the next time a kid says something that seems too big, too bold, too unrealistic, don't laugh. Lean in. Ask them to tell you more, because they might just be telling you something real. If this story reminded you of a moment when you were doubted, dismissed, or quietly brave, I'd love to hear it in the comments. Was there a time when someone believed in you when no one else did? Or maybe a time when you didn't believe in yourself until someone showed up and proved you right? Your stories matter here. And your voice? It's always welcome. If you'd like more stories like this, gentle, powerful, worth remembering, subscribe to the channel and tap the bell. We release stories that lift the quiet voices, because those are the ones the world needs most. Thank you for being here. Until next time, keep telling the truth, even if no one claps.